Hi guys, in this video we're going to look at changing the rear brake pads, and I'll also mention how to remove the rotors on a Ford Mustang. This is a GT 2003 and I need to change the rear brake pads on this. So this is what they look like. Well, there's the old one, there's a new one right there, and your old ones will probably look a little something like that. So I've already done one side already, I'm just gonna do the other side now. Okay, so once you've pulled the wheel off, just put it beside you, out the way, and you'll get a little something like this. This is the brake caliper right here. You can see it attaches on the brake rotor here, and within that are the brake pads themselves. So we want to take these brake pads out and exchange them for our new ones. To remove the brake caliper, which is this right here, we need to undo two 12mm bolts. So if you have a metric socket set, that would be great. Just put in a 12mm socket there, and you want to undo two bolts. This top one right here, and underneath there is another one right there. You'll notice this spring gets in the way, so if you have a nice long extension, maybe a little longer than this, you'll be able to undo that bottom one no problem. If you don't have an extension, you might have a lot of issues with this coil getting in your way there. So these are the two bolts you want to undo, this one here and this one here. Once you do that, we'll look at taking this caliper off here. So 12mm. Okay, so I've just removed those two 12mm bolts on the top and bottom here. You will notice that the caliper is still a little bit sticky. This is because as the pads wear, the piston in here slowly comes out, so there's always going to be friction there. You can see you can't really remove it there. What you really want to do, you can try lightly hit it with a rubber mallet. You don't want to really hit it too hard because you don't want your car to fall off the jack. So I find if you get a tire iron here, some of them have this hook end. If you just slide that into the top of the caliper just there, and just lightly pull the other way on that, you can see the caliper is slowly slipping off there. If you carefully do that until the complete caliper comes off, then we'll look at changing the brake pads. Okay, so I've just pulled the brake caliper off here. You can see it just dangling down there. It is connected by two hoses, so it won't actually go far. The front brake caliper, however, you can actually just fold that up here while you're working on the front, but the back one is a little different. You can see these are the old brake pads there. They're pretty worn, look like they need to be replaced. If the pad goes down to the steel here, this is the screeching you hear when you apply your brakes, in which case you may have grooves on your brake rotor here. If that does happen, or has happened, check both sides. You will need to replace this also. If you cheap out and only replace the pads, what will happen is on your new pads you will have grooves within your new pad from the old brake rotor there. So if your brake rotor is visibly damaged, then change this also. Mine is slightly rusty, but it is quite smooth on both sides, so I'm only going to be replacing the pads today. If you do want to change your brake rotor, there are two 15mm bolts on the back. If you can see there, one right there and one there. They're both 15mm, so your metric socket set will come in handy there also. And once you do that, this the caliper bracket there will slide off, and you can just take your brake rotor right out there, no problem. Really easy. Those 15mm bolts are pretty tight, so you will need to apply a little bit of force, but remember, do not let your car fall off the jack there. So just a bit of a warning there. So today I'm going to be replacing the pads only, so this is as far as I need to go really with this. Okay, so before you put your new pads back on, we will need to do one important step, and that is called compressing the piston within the caliper. As I mentioned before, as your brake pads slowly wear, this piston here, this bit right here, slowly decompresses. So as your pads become more wear down from braking, you can see this gap will get smaller and smaller. So when we fit our new pads, you'll notice they are visibly a lot thicker than the old ones. We need to compress this piston back into where it was here. There are a few ways to do that. With some cars it's really easy. You can use a C-clamp and really attach it to here and here and slowly compress the piston. With this particular car, this piston is slightly different. You can see right there. It has two little notches here. There's one right here and one on the other side. It's a little dark, but it's in there. So one to the left and one to the right. When we compress this piston, we need to turn it clockwise and compress at the same time. So we can't use a C-clamp for that, otherwise you will either snap your C-clamp or damage the piston. So what we really need is a special tool. I have one right here. This is called a brake caliper piston compression kit. I'll show you the actual kit itself. As you can see here, they actually give you two of them. I don't know why. I bought this for $45 from Harbor Freight, and it has lots of different attachments for different calipers for different cars. I'm using the Mustang one, so this one right here seems to do me quite well. Okay, so if you don't feel like shelling out $45 for a brake piston compression toolkit here, and I don't really blame you, you can get another device called a cube. It's about this big. You attach it to a standard socket wrench, and you can actually attach that to here and turn it like a socket with a bit of pressure. It works quite well for most cars, but with these Mustang ones, the notches quite different from other cars, and it's really awkward to actually do. It's hard to apply the pressure and turn at the same time. It is doable. I've heard stories of people doing it successfully with C-clamps and channel pliers, but it's really hard work, so it's your choice really. I actually bought one of these kits, as I will be doing it quite often, so I thought it was worth the investment really, and I can always loan it to a friend for a beer in exchange, so it will slowly pay for itself really, I suppose. So if you do have one of these tools, this is what I'm going to be using today. We're going to try and compress this piston with the tool. Okay, so with this tool, what we want to do is select the correct end for your piston here. This one seems to work quite well. Just double check it actually lines up with the end of the piston. So as you can see, the two little notches on here, this one and this one there, should go in the holes on either side of the piston head right there. So when we put that on there, you can see in a second that it should. It's really hard to do with one hand. Okay, you can see it fits right there, so we're able to turn the piston while we're compressing. So select the correct piston here. You'll see on the end of the tool it's slightly magnetic, this one. You can just place that on the end there and it should snap in right there. And make sure your tool is all the way to the bottom for now. And what you then want to do is get this bar here and put it over the head of the tool. So again, really hard to do with one hand, but there we go. So the tool is now ready to compress this piston. What you want to do is slot the tool in here. You can see the bar is behind the bracket right there, and also line up the notches on your piston head here. It's really hard to do with two hands, but I'm trying with one. Okay, you can see it's all in there nice. There's a little bit of slack, so what we want to do now is turn our bar there so I don't have to hold it, so I can show you slightly better. Okay, so I've just unscrewed this piece here, and this has allowed the bar to come right to this end while applying the correct pressure, and you can see the nibs are inserted into the piston head here. So it's pretty solid now. We are still dangling from our cables, so do remember to take care with this. You can take this complete assembly out if you'd like to do it on a workbench or something, but I don't really want to invest in the time in doing all that, so I just made sure it's nice and secure here, and try not to pull on these cables here. So once you've attached the compression device here, just simply turn this clockwise. The pressure is being applied itself using this bracket, and keep going until the piston is fully inside the brake caliper. You'll notice it's in when it's really hard to turn this, so don't overturn this. Okay, so I've just compressed the piston in here. You can see the gap is a lot bigger now, so this allows room for the rotor and the brake pads in there. To get this tool off, simply just get a wrench. I've got an adjustable one here, and just turn this, and that should loosen the device so you can pull it out. Okay, there's one thing I'd like to show you before we go ahead and put the brake pads back in, is that the piston head here, you can see the notches we've been using to compress the head. They need to be sitting at 9 and 3 o'clock. The reason for this is that when we put our brake pads back in, on the back they have these little nibs, these little prongs there. You can see there's 3 of them there. They need to sit in the reservoir of the piston head. Otherwise you'll get a nice little hole either up here or down there. So they need to be lined up with these holes here. So if you put it at 9 and 3, when the pads are back on, it will slot right in there. So you won't have any danger of that happening when you put your new brake pads back on the rotor. Okay, so oh, I did want to mention quickly before I move on that if your pin heads here aren't lined up to 9 and 3, then just, if the piston head won't go in anymore, then just bring it out a tiny bit. It won't really, your new brake pads will still fit, so don't worry about that. Okay, so the next part, before we slap on the new brake pads, you may want to put on a bit of brake clean on the back, never on the front, otherwise you can forget about stopping your car. So this is the back here. You might want to put a little bit on. What this brake compound does is it keeps these within the housing here and stops them from vibrating, so it prevents squealing. I've never really had that problem with this car, so it is optional, and you may want to put a bit on there. You also may want to clean your rotor a little bit. To clean the rotor, you can use brake cleaner and just apply that on, and use a soft towel to do that. You don't really want to scratch this, so never use grease or anything like that, otherwise it will turn into oil and sludge at hot temperatures, and yeah, you probably won't be able to stop your car. So think about learning how to jump out the window effectively. So the next thing we want to do is put on our new brake pads. Here they are right here. So one goes behind here like so, and another one in front right there. So there you can see one is on each side of the rotor. It's probably self-explanatory as you've already taken it apart yourself, so that's where they go. And now we've compressed the piston here. This gap should be big enough to accommodate our new pads and the rotor here. So there we go. Okay, so when you're putting the caliper back on, you'll notice it may be a little tricky to get these bolts back in due to the springed coils on top of the brake pads there. You may be able to squeeze with enough force to get this in. If you can't, then you can get some of these channel pliers to squeeze the caliper against the housing, like so. So if you squeeze that, that will allow this to come flush, and you'll be able to screw this in a lot easier. Same with the top one also. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when you put these bolts back in, you can see a small ledge under this hole just there. It's quite hard to see, but there it is. this here, this is what the 12mm bolt screws into. You can see it turns with the bolt, so sometimes you might want to put a wrench on there to keep that still while you're bolting that in. The other thing is that this must face this way, so it actually falls on top of this ledge right here. If you face it this way, then you can see it won't sit on top of the ledge here. So do make sure the top and bottom one of these is facing horizontally like this. It'll become evident when you look at it yourself, so just take a note of that. You may not have noticed it when you undid the bolt originally just there.